My take on this issue, I have a more specific concerns, and I'm bringing the historical perspective. And in fact, our clinic is now in the process of intervening in a case before the Supreme Court dealing with the right to vote for non-resident Canadian citizens. And so some of the arguments I'm making there is similar to the argument I'm making here today, which is that we need to look at the history of Canada when it comes to the right to vote. And of course, historically, through very overtly racist laws and policies, the Canadian government and a number of the provinces had explicitly denied the right to vote for members of many different racialized groups, including, but not limited to, Indigenous people, Chinese Canadians, Japanese Canadians, and so on. In fact, the disenfranchisement of Chinese Canadians started with our first Prime Minister, Sir John Macdonald, who introduced an election law in 1885, which expressly deprived persons from the quote-unquote Mongolian and Chinese race of the right to vote because, according to him, they had no British instincts or no British feelings or aspirations. And Chinese Canadians did not gain the right to vote or regain the right to vote until 1947. And of course, the Indigenous people did not have the right to vote until 1960. So, and you may recall in 2015, the election, there was 46 quote-unquote visible minority MPs who were elected to the Canadian Parliament. And some media call it watershed moment in our history. Others describe it as record-breaking, a victory for Canada's multiculturalism, as if we, the people of color, have finally arrived. Yet in reality, out of the total of 338 seats, the politicians from the various racialized groups made up just over 13% of the parliament, when the population of the so-called visible minority in Canada today is around 19%. And the largest three groups are South Asian, Chinese, and Blacks, who made up of 61% of all the communities of color. And Trudeau then appointed his cabinet, saying that he has chosen a group that looks like Canada. Of course, he neglected to mention that apart from, I think, 4 South Asian cabinet ministers and maybe a West Asian cabinet ministers, there are no other racialized groups represented in the cabinet. So when we're talking about the electoral reform today, for myself, and when I consider which system of election would be best for our democracy, I have 2 questions in mind, and this is my own personal view. First of all, which electoral system will be able to best engage the marginalized groups, including racialized communities, new Canadians, in order to ensure their full participation in the democratic process? And my second question is, regardless of the process that we chose, what do we need to do to make our political bodies more reflective of the racial diversity of Canada? And so I use these 2 questions to guide me in my reading of the report, and I actually did read up to 155 pages when I was traveling between Ottawa and Toronto yesterday. And I have to say that I'm a little bit disappointed. The special committees did make some passing references to some experts, and they didn't name the experts. Like some experts were saying that we have to pay special attention when we choose the reform. We have to make sure that certain groups like women, racialized groups, people with disabilities are not being disenfranchised. They made that passing remark, but there is no specific recommendation or even an attempt of coming up with any recommendation to address the issue, particularly for racialized communities. And this is in contrast with the committee's report and treatment of some of the other underrepresented groups or groups that are currently not as engaged in the political process as they should, including the Indigenous peoples, students, youth, people with disabilities, women. There was some kind of a specific suggestions or, quotes from experts on how to increase their democratic participation, and particularly in the case of Indigenous people and women, which of course deal with their political representation as well. So I guess my point is, I look forward to this discussion, and the fact that these issues are not even being addressed fully is one of the key reasons why we need to talk about electoral reform today. Thank you.